and welcome back to another episode of Inspiring Generations. I'm your host, Celeste Williams. Today, we are talking about different subjects, mostly in Irish history. I'm not an expert on Irish history. I've only been intrigued by it and inspired by it because my grandmother was of Irish descent, and we always celebrated the day with joy and laughter and fun, and even though she taught us that it was so much more deeper than that, I didn't understand as a child, but now as an adult, I understand it in a different light where I can teach my future generations of what St. Patrick's Day is really about, even though, pop culture, uses it as a fun day. And that's okay too, because in this life, we're meant to have fun and enjoy celebration of all cultures. And I'm not going to sit here today and make you think that, like I said, I'm not the expert. But today, I do have a guest with me, and she's been here before. She was here for Black History Month. She has some knowledge of the journey of being part Irish American and what it means to her and what it means in pop culture. And so she's come today with some wonderful topics for us to touch on as we go forward into the St. Patrick's Day celebrations that are coming up. My guest today is Marianne Ramos.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Celeste. And I wanted to tell our audience that we were thinking of Barbara Melvin, an Irish American from Chelsea who was absolutely a leader in all of the great St. Patrick's Day parties that happened in the Senior Center over the years. So I do represent the older generation, as you can see, and I wanted to give a shout out to that. There is so much common ground all people have. I have one grandfather who is also Irish. His name was Jeremiah. He died on a battlefield, but he was revived just enough to come home and have some children, and then he totally died. So my father was 4 when he passed away. I never got to meet him. I never got to learn much about him. But anyway, that's my connection. Actually, the Irish people are Celtic. The old Celtic, the ancient Celtic people were not just in Ireland. You probably knew they were in other places like Scotland and Wales, the Pyrenees Mountains. And interestingly enough, the Canary Islands and the people of the Canaries were under Spain, and many immigrated to Cuba. If you've been in Chelsea a long time, you've probably seen those. Celeste, you have, right? The blue-eyed people from Cuba.
I never knew. Like, asking you those questions, it enlightened me a little more. Okay? Asking you about your dad, right, in our conversations that we've had, I've asked you about, that part of you, and how do you celebrate it, and how do you feel about it. And the feedback you gave me was that yours was mostly an American experience from an Irish descendant. So, but far as England is concerned, and Wales, and those parts of the land, I knew about because that's where my grandmother's people migrated from and made their way to America. And that's as much as I know from her. But we want to talk about our senior life, okay?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And we've had fabulous years of enjoying St. Patrick's Day monthly socials through the Senior Center. And that's when you were program coordinator.
Yes.
And I was always curious to ask you, on that day, did you ever have anybody truly get up and speak about, their culture and them being from Ireland or being an Irish Latino or being an Irish African. I mean, because the diaspora
Oh,
is very broad.
absolutely. I have this expression, blended and splendid, which covers all of that and more. We know that within the word Irish, we have what we'll call the Black Irish, who were people whose descendants came off of the shipwrecks from Spain. And there's also the Orange Irish from the northern province that were considered the rivals and enemies sometimes of the Green Irish, who embraced Roman Catholicism and who celebrated who they were in a different way. I have the first trivia question. Are you ready? There are two. Celeste, did you know there are two, not one, USA holidays that originated from the Irish culture? Okay, people at home, you're going to be saying right away, St. Patrick's Day. And isn't that true? But Celeste, did you know there's another celebration that this country has every year?
I don't know much. That's why you're here
Okay.
to do
All
the
right.
expert part of it. I do know traditional Irish culture. That's why I'm hosting and putting a light on the subject, but through your lens, right?
Okay.
So, people out there, listen up closely. Marianne has some trivia questions today.
And some of you are going to know the answer. Okay, if you said St. Patrick's Day, yay, that's worth 10 points. But if you said Halloween, the hard answer, that's worth 50 points in case you're keeping score. If you know it was Halloween, know that many of the practices of the ancient Celtic people were made more child-friendly over the years and were incorporated in Halloween. As a matter of fact, this book is an example of something important. We all know about the man we celebrate on March 17th, whose name is St. Patrick. Does everyone know where he was born? Here's another trivia question. Was he born in Ireland or maybe somewhere else? Well, the answer is, everyone, he was actually born in England.
That's correct. If you knew that St. Patrick was born in England, that's points for you right now.
Let's give them 50 points for that.
You get 50 points for that answer.
Okay, so what happened? St. Patrick was 12 years old. He looked strong and healthy, and so some people decided to kidnap him and sell him into slavery in Ireland. So he had to take care of pigs. He was not happy, but he got to, at least he learned something about another culture. And when he finally came home again,
that's the main idea of this story, is that he learned about another culture.
and he learned to have compassion.
That's the main idea.
He learned to have compassion for people who didn't always treat him well. So he felt called of God to become, as he grew, to be a priest. And he felt called of God, I'm going back to Ireland, even though I'm still angry at those pigs, I'm going back.
Yeah.
And so he did go back to Ireland, and there's many legends and also historical facts about how the people of the ancient Celtic tradition mostly accepted the Roman Catholic religion. And the bonus was interesting. They had no written language. They had pictures, but they didn't write words. So suddenly the monks came over. Of course, catechism. Many of you know a lot about catechism. So they wrote
definitely
Catholic instructional materials. But then the monks started listening to these people and their ancient beliefs and ancient ways of seeing the world and even the other world. And they started using calligraphy to write all about that, too.
So, just to clear the air, and we went in such deep depth about St. Patrick, right? But on a lighter note of St. Patrick, if you understood what Marianne was just talking about, the moral of the story, for me, St. Patrick is a great story of forgiveness.
Yes.
Okay? Forgiveness about your conditions in life. If you're going through something and someone's oppressing you and you finally be the one that come out on top of the situation, you don't go back and retaliate. You kind of like forgive the situation, and St. Patrick found a love for Ireland, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Even despite all what he went through, he found a love for it. And that's what amazes me about the legend and the journey of St. Patrick.
So let's be lighthearted now. And I'm talking especially to the people who are at least 60 years old, but to all people too. But it's pop culture that they will know the most about. So this time, your grandmother and grandfather is going to win the most points. Okay, so let's think about people of the Irish culture who were very much part of the United States pop culture in the 20th century and beyond. Okay? For example, a TV host. Celeste is going to know the answer. A TV host, they're from the 1960s and 70s.
You out there, you'll know too.
Even
if you're
the
older,
50s.
If you're older, the young people, you might not know this, but older people, this trivia question you should definitely get.
Oh, I'm actually showing you the answers. Excuse me.
Yes, you are.
Excuse me. So
you should get it already.
If you saw the answer, you remember the man who used to say in his famous national show that came on once a week, "We're having a very big shoe tonight." Do you know his name?
Yeah.
Do you know his name? Mr. Ed Sullivan, of course. And we know he launched people from every culture on his show.
Oh, yeah.
Irish and Jewish, circus stars, and famous pop singers.
Well, you have to go into like old footage to see some of his work. And if you're interested in Ed Sullivan's work, I can tell you can Google it, or you can look it up on YouTube if you really want to get into pop culture and see what happened way before you were born, or maybe you were born and you know of this subject. Ed Sullivan was great. I watched him as a kid, so I understand what you're totally talking about.
And
it was a great show.
As he got older,
Great
one of his last really famous guests, he had the Beatles, he had the Motown groups.
Everyone.
And one of the most exciting things was he had young Michael Jackson at the age of 8 was
Yes,
also
he
on
did.
the show. And there were jugglers and there were clowns. There was everything on his show.
Yes.
So anyway.
So what other trivia question?
Oh, yes.
You got some more trivia questions for us?
Television.
Okay.
50s and 60s. Many of the people I'm talking to remember the Lawrence Welk show. If you remember Lawrence Welk, raise your hand. He had a regular performer who was on every week. The Irish tenor, whose name was, do you know the name? This is going to be worth 100 points. Mr. Joe Feeney. Joe Feeney sung traditional Irish songs. Even Lawrence Welk might have been of Polish extraction. The Lennon sisters were Polish and Irish and Mexican. It was, but everyone, and it became like a TV family.
Now that you just said that, right?
Yes.
I've got this vision of a multicultural mixture of people enjoying Irish culture.
Yes.
In a whole. It didn't matter what their background was. The love of the music and the art brought Joe Feeney and people like the Andrews sisters together. They were fantastic, by the way. I remember I was just a wee little girl.
Yes.
And fantasizing that I wanted to be, have a lot of sisters like that.
Yeah.
And we all like sing songs and make people happy.
Yes.
And that's what they did. The Andrews sisters were a great group. And if you're interested, again, in this subject and the type of music that was back then in that era, I'm giving you reference of information that you can go on social media and you can find what Marianne is talking about right now.
But I have something very exciting remember in the 50s, television became a normal part of many people's lives. It was the new, latest, greatest technology. And as from the 50s on to the 60s, there was a very important TV show. It was called Disneyland. And Disneyland was named for who? A famous Irish American, and his name was what? You all know, Walt Disney.
Now that's something I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know Walt Disney was of Irish descent.
Oh, yes.
Had no clue. But besides the cynicism, you know, of what people think of Disney, right?
Right.
As a little girl, I watched a lot of Minnie Mouse. I was drawn to the Mickey Mouse Club,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with Annette Funicello
Yes.
and all those kids that were on the show at that time. They brought a little joy, you know, if you really think about what was going on in that time. It was very important.
They were of the time.
It was
to
very
be sure.
important, yeah.
But to go beyond that, they actually had another show that started when I was very small, when I was a wee lass, and it would feature Walt Disney's latest products, which were animated movies, as well as movies that were dramatized, such
Yeah.
as Davy Crockett. But of all the movies that he made, some of them are very famous and some are not. And so if you want to win a big, by the way, Disney was like an innovator, a technology innovator of his day. The way he used animation in brand new ways that had never been done before. It's old school animation, but it's a fascinating, look it up too.
Yeah.
But you know what? I was curious about Irish culture. Nobody told me anything about it. It wasn't really in my school books.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's true.
So Disney had a flick.
Yeah, it's true.
Disney had a flick that he was exploring his own culture. And if you know the name of this flick, you're going to get 500 points.
Let me think.
Many people will not know
Let me
this.
think.
And if you do...
Are you thinking about this?
Okay.
Because this is very educational today, because like Marianne said, Irish history is not like, wasn't in the books when we were coming up, so we pretty much got it from the people in our lives, or we experienced it through, you know, the holidays.
Right.
You know?
So Walt Disney, in 1959, put out a flick called Darby O'Gill and the Little People. If you know that one, give yourself at least 500 points.
Wow.
And this explored through animation and human actors things such as the leprechauns who lived underground and their sneaky, sly, diabolical ways at times. Disney's other fairies, Tinkerbell, the little blue fairy, were so sweet and kind and small and cute.
Hey, I love Tinkerbell.
But this leprechaun, whose name was Brian Connors, and his gang that lived underground were quite the opposite. They were drinking whiskey out of kegs. They were smoking their pipes. They were boasting and bragging, and they were bodacious people watching over their gold. So Darby had a very dangerous situation when he made friends with them. But it ends happily. And the handsome young man who rescues his daughter, her name was Janet Monroe, but his name, I'm going to ask you this trivia question, people, and Celeste might know who it is. This actor,
I might
he
know
moved on to become a famous cowboy in a famous cowboy family that we watch on Sunday evenings, many of us in the 60s, and his name was, by the way, here's a hint, he was Adam Cartwright. Do you know the actor's name? He's Irish. Oh, if you do, this is 1,000 points for you. His name
Audience, are you watching? Because this is the last of the trivia questions, so we really want you to get this one, okay?
Okay. Yes.
Focus.
His name was Pernell Roberts. If you know it, that's mega points for you. Celeste, if we have time, I wanted to go a little deeper into less entertaining but very important.
Well, this is my direction that I want to take us in.
Okay.
Because we reference this information and where you can get it.
Yes.
So we don't want to weigh you down with a lot of educational subjects that you can go out and educate yourself to dig a little deeper, because that's my motto. Just dig a little deeper into any subject that you might be curious about. I did it with Irish American history, and I've gone all the way to Ireland, this is a map of Ireland that you're looking at right here, that Miss Marianne Ramos had the pleasure of bringing us, so we could pretty much get an idea of what Ireland looks like on the European side of things. But we also have a lot of Irish Americans here, and even the culture from Ireland to America might have some slight differences. They might have some assumptions and stereotypes, and whether it's through pop culture, whether it's through religion, whether it's through just life itself. There's, beyond the leprechauns and all the things that we might enjoy and think it's funny about the subject is deeper. But there's also something else going on this month that I wanted to touch on, and that was Women's History Month, because you, as having a father, what I understood, that's was Irish American, and
through his grandfather,
as a woman that has these combination of cultures going on, and the speciality of being bilingual is a blessing too in itself.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's an inspiring trait about you.
Thank you.
That you do tackle subjects on a higher level than what we would think of on the norm. But it's not just the book work of it all. What is your experience as a daughter of an Irish American? Like, how did you navigate through different cultures, different systems, as a woman too?
I'm glad
would be my
I'm glad
question.
you asked, because this is going to help me say two things that are on my heart. When I was 12 years old, there was a presidential campaign that was very historical between John F. Kennedy, a young, barely old enough to be president man who was Irish Catholic.
Yes.
We all know John F. Kennedy. He's more than we know, because in the Latin nations, in places like Honduras and Colombia, the Dominican Republic, and so many other nations, Salvador, they know things, great and beautiful things that this president did when he finally did win the election in their nations, that is not often celebrated or spoken in the USA. So he's a hero to many people in this country, but also throughout the Americas. So that's a sense of unity.
That's one thing that unified you with the other cultures that understood what was going on in that time.
And his Roman Catholic faith was another big factor. And when he was running to be voted upon as, he hoped, the president, his opponents said, well, since you're Roman Catholic, the Pope will tell you how to make decisions instead of you doing it yourself. So he had to be very diplomatic about that, similar to the more recent story of Barack Obama, who said, well, Reverend Wright is going to influence you. And so both men had great, deep thinking answers where they assured that they would be honoring separation from church and state. There's one other person that I chose for a role model when I was also very young. The folk music era was in the early 60s.
That was the best. I love folk music. I totally love it.
And the civil rights era was flowing together. Let's just say that there's a new generation. Some of them were just maybe 5 years older than me, some of them as my age, but who really had an ideal for a better a newer and better time in the United States and the world. They're really believing in peace versus war, really believing that we could be better, all of us, together, if we had equal rights, civil rights, and it was wonderful. And one person who personified that was Joan Baez. Now, when she became famous, she was a teenager. She had an Irish mother.
Joan Baez, that's right.
Did you wonder why her name was Joan Baez if she was so Irish? Well, her father was from Mexico.
Okay.
But Joan Baez was not exactly the same as the usual thought, oh, she's Irish Catholic. No, her family was Quaker. Her mother and father was totally devoted.
But what do you know, we can talk about her, but we want to talk about you. And
we're getting to me.
And Joan Baez was one of your inspirations, wasn't she?
She certainly was.
Because I can hear it, the way you talk about her. But with so excitement. So let's finish.
But her courage, yes.
Yeah, let's talk about her.
Her courage was that when she was still a teenager, a tiny, slim young woman, she stood with Martin Luther King on one of his marches because she knew she was already a celebrity, and other celebrities did the same. She was a celebrity, and that might help the cause, and it might be more protective of the people in the cause. But she was facing danger. She was facing
as a woman
and she was
in
facing,
that time.
and she was facing possible death even.
How was women's voting rights in that time?
Well, we had to be 21.
Was it hard for you guys? Because that's more of what I wanted to know. How was it for you?
As a woman?
As a woman in that time of, you have these mixtures of cultures going on.
Yes.
In that time, it's like, who do you serve? You know,
yes.
Do you serve your Latino side? Do you serve your Indian side? Do you serve your Irish side? Or do you become a whole person by engaging with each culture with tender, loving care and wanting to be educated? Is the most part of this. So what I wanted to know from you is, in that time, how was it for women, as far as women in your category, in your class? Was voting easy for them to go to the polls and vote, or were they still fighting? Were they still in that Virginia Slims moment? You know what I mean?
I would say that voting was, as long as you were 21, was easier than many of the other things we had to navigate in the day. The minimum wage finally went up to $1.25 an hour. Women got paid less than men. Help wanted in the newspapers, you got a job in the newspaper back then. Help wanted women, help wanted men. Separate columns. Women to be hired had to be between 18 and 25 for many jobs.
Wow.
As women, we had much to do to get to where the women are today. And also, in terms of being multicultural, that was considered next to being a communist or a socialist. And I was persecuted by my high school guidance counselor because I joined the VISTA program, inspired by Kennedy himself. But because he chased me through a supermarket and said, "You're an enemy of your country, you're an enemy of your country." So I stood still and I faced him and I said, "Excuse me, why am I an enemy of my country?" He says, "Because you joined the VISTA." I said, "That's the dream of President Kennedy." And I walked away. I had to be fingerprinted for that job. Those were days in which there were things that remind me of now in some ways. Black Lives Matter has stirred up many memories for us older people of the struggles of the late 60s. And these were serious and devastating in some ways, but they were necessary to get to where we are today.
Exactly, because this is how we travel. Like February, we went through Black History Month, and we had so much content on who was in this and who was in that, and we can find all the information that we need to educate ourselves. And sometimes it's sad when people are ignorant to the fact that we go in from Black History Month into March which is Women's History Month, which has a similar theme of suffering, not being able to vote because we passed through that in Black history, where that was an issue. Now we're into March, where there's Women's History. St. Patrick we covered that. But the reason why we're covering those subjects in close reference is because they coincide with each other.
Yes.
Because even though women, struggle, suffrage, St. Patrick struggle, suffrage,
Yes.
We move forward.
We do.
We move forward. We embraced, being educated by someone who knows a little more than us about a subject. Marianne has a lot of subjects that she can touch on right now,
Okay.
as far as women's issues are
Yes.
concerned.
Yes.
She gave you some information that you can go and look up, whether it be calligraphy, in the time where the written word in Ireland wasn't really a written word. Calligraphy is a nice art.
Yes.
Would you say art?
Yes, I could say that.
It's an art, I love the way it looks when people write it out. She brought you some trivia questions today about who was big in pop culture.
Yeah.
Like Walt Disney, Ed Sullivan, who else was it? Joe Feeney. She talked about people that inspired her, like Joan Baez,
Yes.
who is also Irish and Mexican. So even if you have Latino heritage or African American, Black American, I don't care what your culture is. If you are celebrating St. Patrick's Day this year, everybody's Irish on that day. Just enjoy and be safe and appreciate all of who you are, because it'll make you be less biased against another culture if you knew that you had a little bit of that in you.
Yes.
That's just my thoughts on that.
Oh, you're making me bursting with something I want to say on that.
But you are going to be able to.
Yes.
We're not done with this subject.
Oh, how wonderful.
We'll
Good.
be exploring different topics this month. Like I said, we happened to touch on 2 topics today, which was women's suffrage, right to vote, or Marianne's experience with the visuals of pop culture, getting in touch with her own side of her Irish side, how healing it was, for us both.
Yes.
So I'm going to let Marianne lead us off with some thoughts of inspiration. Marianne?
Okay. Thank you so much, because you hit on some very deep things. As a woman, and I speak to women of every culture, what have I learned in my lifetime so far? Things can get better. I'm so happy that this country does have a way that the Constitution can be amended, and so that the voting age can go down to 18.
Yeah.
And so that civil rights can happen. And more recently, domestic violence was once considered normal, average, and I've suffered through domestic violence myself, speaking of women's issues.
Thank you.
And that's what brought me to the
Thank
Boston
you.
area. I was a fugitive of domestic violence.
Yeah.
But it's brought me to my new life here that I appreciate. And I'm so glad.
So inspirational.
Celeste, I'm so glad that the young women today have more resources than were ever
I am as
available.
well.
And
I am totally with you on that. I am so happy that today the young women have more, like Marianne said, more outreach. If you're dealing with domestic violence, if you just can't navigate at all, there's plenty of outreach places out there. Marianne is a great advocate for that, and so am I, because we both understand that the risk of domestic violence and what it, toll it takes on the family and the children and a community in a whole. So on that note, would you like to say anything else, Marianne, before?
Just very quickly, this is really on my heart. Another thing that I've seen change in this country is it's no longer considered crazy, sinful, or criminal for people to be friends across cultures. When I was younger, the police would be watching you very closely. It was painful the way people were separated. And now multiculturalism has become a norm and an ideal for all people. So I'd like to ask people to embrace the joy that we can be a truly blended community. You may have a blended family, you may feel blended yourselves, and within our community we can be, and Celeste, you can help me with the slogan, blended and splendid. Thank you so much.
That's Marianne's slogan. Never forget it. Blended and splendid. But once you recognize that that's a part of who you are, that's up to you to educate yourself. It's up to you to want to, be more open and know about things. No one's forcing you. This platform is not to demand anything. It's just to help you get more educated about the people around you and the cultures that are around you before. We are all not any culture. We are just all one. At the end of the day, that's what it looks like to me.
Amen.
But however, how you view it, it will be on your terms. I want to thank you so much for tuning in today to this hot topic, because as you know, like I said, the holidays are coming up. We got a Women's History Month, and we got a whole lot of things going on this month. We've left Black History in February, but we're still dealing with it in March, and other subjects. So, the conversations are still going to go on. We're still going to get inspired, by generations. Sometimes, that inspiration doesn't come from Celeste Williams. It comes from a guest like Marianne that is very thorough and very appreciative for art and other cultures, and she's out there every day trying to make things better. So thank you for coming on
And
Inspiring Generations. I thank you for watching, and I will see you back in the next episode.